This is the collapse of the American economy and civilization. The United States is going through a very severe economic meltdown, and at the moment almost the entire economy has come to a standstill. Economists are estimating that this crisis will end up being a Depression-era level of economic downturn. The US GDP is expected to drop by more than 30% if this crisis continues for the next 2 months. The global economy is also collapsing, and various entities of our society are at the brink of a collapse. In this economic fallout, the housing market is also not left out. This time we have something different from what we had during the 2008 global financial crisis, where we had huge mortgage debts in the form of CDOs. Inefficiency in controlling the amount of mortgages being issued prior to the 2008 crisis sent the prices of homes to stratospheric levels, and this is what has created the bubble that later busted in a very scary way. In the current economic meltdown, the collapse of the housing market is taking a different shape. Millions of Americans have already lost their jobs, or their working hours have been significantly reduced. This means that many people have already lost their income. We have an unprecedented rise in cases where thousands of people are defaulting their mortgage payments. The entire economy has come to a halt. This has left many Americans financially weak. This is making it almost impossible for anyone to pay their mortgages on time. Experts are warning that things will only get worse, and it's just the other day that Bloomberg reported that mortgage lenders across the country are preparing for one of the biggest waves of delinquencies in American history. Everyone is trying to buy time in hope that the economy will open by the end of April, but this might not work. At the moment, many small businesses in America are at the verge of collapsing. The Treasury is planning to provide the much-needed liquidity to the economy. Otherwise, we might have massive foreclosures and mayhem in the mortgage market. We have millions of borrowers who have already lost their jobs. This means that they can request for 180 days postponement of mortgage payment without any penalties or effect on their credit score. According to the Moody's Analytics, close to 30% of Americans have outstanding home loans. This means that approximately 15 million homes might not be paid for if the U.S. economy remains closed. Mortgage lenders are operating in darkness because the scope of this economic meltdown is not yet fully known. No one knows how long it will last, but it's estimated that for the next 2 to 4 months, most of the people will not be able to pay their mortgages. This might end up being the biggest crisis in the housing market because things are happening very fast. If the economy remains closed for months, it'll be almost impossible for anyone to pay their mortgages. While the housing market is tumbling, the U.S. labor market is also on a freefall. Thousands of Americans are losing their jobs every passing day. It's been reported that by now, more than 6.6 million Americans have already lost their jobs. Economists are warning that this number will continue skyrocketing in the coming weeks. The stimulus packages are just not enough to sustain American people for long enough. As people lose their jobs, they are getting depressed. This is creating a perfect storm for big social unrest. The Federation of Red Crescent Societies has warned that in the western cities a social bomb can explode any moment, specifically in the low-income areas. As a result of this panic, in recent weeks, it's been reported that many Americans are hoarding guns because they fear that a massive social unrest can erupt because of this economic crisis. This fear has compelled President Trump to deploy the National Guard across various states to maintain order at this perilous moment. In places like South Carolina, police have arrested people attempting to raid a storage warehouse. This is the writing on the wall to Americans on what can possibly happen next if this economic meltdown continues. This explains the reason why gun sales have skyrocketed in recent days across the country. Google searches on where to buy ammunition online have increased dramatically. This shows how Americans are worried that this economic crisis will trigger a big social split in the United States. Because of extreme wealth inequality, many households are unprepared for an economic downturn. This is creating a big imbalance in society. Many people in poor neighborhoods have been laid off. At the moment, they have zero income. They might be easily motivated to start protests or bring instability in their communities in one way or the other. Everyone can tell that we have never been this way, both economically and socially, before, ever in history. The stock market has never crashed to this extent in a matter of weeks. The entire economy is virtually collapsing. This is the biggest economic fallout in modern history. This is just the beginning. And this economic crisis is heading everywhere across the world. The global economy is collapsing. Supply chains are being disrupted in many nations. This is an economic inferno. The stock market is collapsing at a rate never seen before. The US markets are already down more than 30% for the first time in many years. In the process, wealth worth trillions of dollars have been utterly destroyed. This is the biggest economic disruption in the world. Economies across the global landscape are shaking. This is the beginning, and we are not yet in the middle of this crisis because the number of infected people is increasing every passing day. Soon, we might see completely empty shelves in some of the major stores in the United States. Everyone is worried that the supply chains will fail soon. The Federal Reserve is making a lot of effort to boost the economy, but their efforts may not have a big impact. The emergency aid package by the government cannot fully fix the U.S. economy. People have to get back to work as soon as possible. The quantitative easing program by the government may not be effective this time as it was during the 2008 financial crisis. The Fed has promised to inject unlimited amount of liquidity to the market. This means that the Federal Reserve will be buying unlimited amounts of assets in this crisis. At the end of the day, the government will have injected trillions of dollars into the market. But this will be harmful to the economy. To do this, the Fed will have to print trillions of dollars, and the introduction of these huge amounts of money to the economy means that the dollar will lose a lot of the dollar's value. By the end of the quantitative easing program, the dollar will have lost value. Because of this, we might see astronomical levels of inflation in the United States. Inflation is already here with us. The price of basic commodities like food has begun skyrocketing. This means that millions of Americans will find themselves in serious economic trouble soon. It'll be almost difficult for most people to even place food on their family's table. Most people don't have enough savings to take them through this economic crisis. If this fallout continues for the next 2 months, people will be desperate. They will be willing to do anything to just survive. To try and mitigate this economic meltdown, the Federal Reserve has introduced negative interest rates, and this is becoming a big problem for savers. It'll cost money for people to save their cash in banks. And on top of this, inflation's on the rise. This is hurting the average American. Economic times have dramatically changed. It'll take time for things to settle. In this crisis, no one will escape. The whole economy is declining rapidly. And before this economic meltdown ends, thousands of companies will go bankrupt. Millions of people will lose their jobs. Get ready for very, very difficult economic times. The U.S. economy is turning out to be a house of cards. The economy is collapsing. Things are worsening exponentially. Even if the Federal Reserve injects trillions of dollars into the economy, this crisis will not get out of the way anytime soon. The whole economic system has many flaws. For many years, Americans have suffered in the hands of, let's say it, a corrupt system. At the moment, millions have lost their jobs. This means they cannot even afford to pay their basic bills, mortgage, electricity, even food. Businesses are closing, Americans are losing in a big way. This is the biggest economic collapse in history. And even the Great Depression of the 20th century cannot be compared to this. The entire economy has been shut down for the first time in history. Even during the Second World War, we never saw this level of disruption. Americans need solutions to these economic and health challenges, and everyone is looking upon President Trump to fix things. The government should gear up in solving these problems because America and Americans are suffering.